The most venerable Bhagavan Mahavir, founder of the Jain religion, as well as his contemporary, Bhagavan Buddha, both of whom were completely God-realized, each in their separate teachings reflected the essential message of the Gita to people in folk languages. The soul alone is the truth, and self-realization may be attained with total restraining of the mind and senses. This is the essential message conveyed by the Gita. When Lord Buddha stated that the same essence alone is universal and eternal, he reinforced this essential teaching of the Gita. Not only such a teaching from Lord Buddha, but whatever essence has been professed as universal teachings in the name of religion or spirituality anywhere at all times, such as one universal God, prayer, repentance, penance, and so on, are all teachings found to be contained within the Gita itself, the original seed scripture of mankind. Here then, in Yatharth Gita, these same lessons, coming straight from the spoken words of Swami Sri Adgarananda, are being presented to the world at large in the form of audio cassettes, so that the whole human race can benefit from this universal wisdom. Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Yatharth Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 4. Elucidation of the deed of Yajna. In Chapter 3, Yogeshwar Krishna had given the assurance that if a man followed his precept, free from delusion and with sincere devotion, he would be liberated from the bondage of action. Yoga, both of knowledge and action, has the power to effect liberation from this servitude. The idea of waging war is embodied in yoga. In the present chapter, he points out who the author of yoga is, as well as the stages by which this discipline has evolved.
Imam vivasvate yogam proktavanaham avyayam vivasvan manave praha manurikshva kave bravit.
The Lord said, "It was I who taught the eternal yoga to the sun, Vivaswat, who then taught it to Manu, who taught it to Ikshwaku." It was he, Krishna says, who at the beginning of devotion, Kalp, imparted the knowledge of eternal yoga to the sun, symbolizing righteous impulses, from whom it was passed on to Manu, symbolizing the mind, and then to Ikshwaku, symbolizing aspiration. Krishna, as we have seen, was a yogi. So it is a yogi, a sage dwelling in the Supreme Spirit, who initiates the everlasting yoga at the beginning, or, in other words, at the commencement of worship, and transmits it into the life breath. The sun, the embodiment of light existing in breath, represents the way of God realization. God is the one light that gives light to all. Yoga is everlasting. Krishna has said earlier that the inception, the seed of this process, is indestructible. If it is but begun, it does not cease until it has achieved perfection. The body is cured by medicines, but worship is the remedy for the soul. The beginning of worship is the beginning of self-cure. This act of devotion and meditation is also the creation of an accomplished sage. To the primitive man lying unconscious in the night of ignorance, who has not given a thought to yoga, is brought the perfection of yoga when he meets with an accomplished sage. Just by looking at the great man, by listening to his voice, by rendering albeit an inadequate service to him, and by associating with him. Goswami Tulsidas has also said this: ultimate bliss is granted to the man who has perceived God, as well as to the man who has been noticed by God. Krishna says that at the beginning he taught yoga to the sun. If a realized sage just casts a glance at a devotee, the refinement of yoga is transmitted into the life breath of the lucky soul. All beings that live are animated by the sun, by God who is subject to himself alone. Since light is life, or breath, it is ordained that the Supreme Spirit can be attained only by the regulation of life breath. Transmission of pious instincts into the early man is the imparting of knowledge of yoga to the sun, after which, in due time, the seed of this perfection sprouts in the mind. This is how gods pass on the knowledge to Manu. After the seed has sprouted in the mind, there will arise a wish for the realization of the sage's utterance. If the mind has something in it, there is also the desire to achieve it. This is Manu's preaching yoga to Ikshwaku. There will be a longing or aspiration to do that ordained act which is eternal and which liberates from the bondage of action. If it is so, there is the will to act, and worship is quickened. Krishna now speaks about the point to which yoga takes us after it has been set in motion.
Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa.
Derived from tradition, this yoga was known to sages of the royal stage, Rajarshi. But at this point, O destroyer of foes, it declined and was almost extinct. This yoga, transmitted by an accomplished saint into the breath of the primitive, barbaric man, and thereafter flowing from breath into the mind, thence to longing or aspiration, and from that to active practice, thus developing by gradual stages, reaches the royal stage and is then revealed to the seeker. Extraordinary powers are generated in worshippers who have reached this level. At this critical stage, yoga almost ceases to be in this world or body. So the problem is how to carry it beyond this dividing line. It seems that every seeker is destroyed after reaching this stage. But according to Krishna, it is not so. One who has taken refuge in him as a loved devotee and dear friend is spared.
Sa evayam maya tedya yoga prokta puratanah bhaktosi me sakha cheti rahasyam yetaduttamam.
That is the timeless yoga which I now impart to you, because you are my devotee and beloved friend, and because this yoga embodies a supreme mystery. Arjuna is a Kshatri worshipper of the level of Rajarshi, at which, lashed by waves of achievement, worshippers are in danger of being destroyed. It is not that the beneficial nature of yoga is cancelled at this stage, but worshippers usually stumble after arriving at this point. That eternal and supremely mysterious yoga Krishna now imparts to Arjuna, because his disciple is in the same way on the brink of destruction. And he does this because Arjuna is devoted to him, single-mindedly reliant upon him, and a beloved friend. When the God we crave for, the accomplished sage, abides in the soul and begins to instruct him, only then does real worship begin. Here God and the accomplished sage, as prompters, are synonymous. If God descends into the heart at the level at which we stand, begins to check and guide, and support in case the worshipper stumbles, only then is the mind fully restrained. Unless God stands by as a charioteer, close to the soul as a prompter, there cannot be an adequate initiation to his path. Before this, the adorer is on trial. He has not yet achieved the state of true worship. My revered teacher, my God, used to say, "Ha! I had many a narrow escape, but God saved me. God taught me this, told me that." I sometimes asked, "Maharaji, does God also speak and talk?" Thereupon he would say, "Ho, God talks exactly like you and me, for hours, and without stopping." This made me sad, and I wondered how God speaks. This was an amazing revelation to me. After a while, Maharaji would say, "Why do you worry? God will also speak to you." Now I realize that every word of what he said is true. This is the sentiment of friendship that binds the individual soul with the cosmic spirit. When God begins to resolve doubts like a friend, only then can the worshipper cross the destructive stage safely. So far, Yogeshwar Krishna has dealt with the inception of yoga by a sage, the obstacles in its way, and the means of overcoming them. But Arjuna now asks him,
Aparam bhavato janma param janma vivasvatah kathame tadvijaniyam tvamado proktavaniti.
Arjuna said, "Since Vivaswat, craving for God, was born in the distant antiquity, and your birth is only recent, how am I to believe that you had taught yoga to him?" Krishna has had a recent birth, in remembered time, whereas the breath of knowledge he claims to have transmitted to the sun, Vivaswat, belongs to the dark backyard and abyss of time, as is said. So how is Arjuna to believe that Krishna is the one who had enunciated yoga at the beginning? Krishna resolves the doubt thus.
Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tava charjuna tanyaham veda sarvani natvam vetha parantapa.
The Lord said, "O Arjuna, you and I have passed through innumerable births, but, O vanquisher of foes, whereas you do not have memory of your previous births, I do." Krishna and Arjuna have had numerous births, but the latter does not remember them. The worshipper does not know, but he who has beheld his self knows it, and one who has realized the unmanifest knows it. According to Krishna, his birth is unlike that of others. Attainment of the self is distinct from attainment of a body. Krishna's manifestation cannot be seen with physical eyes. He is birthless, hidden, and eternal, and yet he is born with a human body. Therefore, they who preach that death of the physical body brings liberation offer but a false consolation. A soul realizes the ultimate essence while he is yet in his assumed human body. If there is even the slightest flaw, he has to undergo another birth. Till now, Arjuna has thought Krishna to be a mortal like him. That is why he speaks of his recent birth. Is Krishna like other bodies?
अजोऽपि सन्नव्ययात्मा भूतानामीश्वरोऽपि सन् प्रकृतिं स्वामधिष्ठाय सम्भवाम्यात्ममायया.
Although imperishable, birthless, and God of all beings, I manifest myself, subduing the materialistic world of nature by the mysterious power of Atma Maya. Krishna is imperishable, birthless, and pervading the breath of all beings. But he is manifested when he restrains materialistic attachments by Atma Maya. One kind of Maya is the moral ignorance that makes one accept the reality of the material world, and which is the cause of rebirth in low and inferior forms. The other Maya is that which Krishna calls Yogmaya, of which we are unaware. This is the Maya of self that provides access to the soul and leads to awareness of the Supreme Spirit. It is by the operation of this Yogmaya that Krishna subdues his three-propertied nature and manifests himself. People usually say that they will have a vision of God when he manifests himself through an incarnation. According to Krishna, however, there is no such incarnation as may be seen by others. God is not born in a corporal form. It is only by gradual stages that he controls his three-propertied nature by the exercise of Yogmaya and manifests himself. But what are the circumstances of such manifestation?
Yada yada hi dharmasya glanirбhavati bharata abhyutthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham.
Whenever, O Bharat, righteousness, dharma, declines and unrighteousness is rampant, I manifest myself. Krishna tells the devout Arjuna that when hearts fall into inertia in regard to the Supreme Spirit, the most sublime Dharma, and when the pious are unable to see how to cross safely to the other bank, he begins to shape his form in order to manifest himself. Such a feeling of weariness had come to Manu. Goswami Tulsidas has written of his grief-laden heart because his life had passed without contemplation of God. When despairing tears flow from the eyes of loving worshippers because of their overpowering feeling of helplessness at their inability to steer across unrighteousness, God begins to mold his form into a manifest shape. But that also implies that God manifests himself to only loving worshippers and only for their well-being. God's incarnation comes about only within the heart of a blessed worshipper. But what does the manifest God do?
Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge.
I manifest myself from age to defend the pious, destroy the wicked, and strengthen Dharma. God manifests himself as a savior of saintly men. He, the adored, is the one God after attaining whom there is nothing else to contemplate. Krishna assumes a manifest form from age to age to destroy impediments that obstruct the smooth flow of righteous impulses, such as wisdom, renunciation, and restraint, as also to annihilate the demoniacal forces of passion, anger, attachment, and repugnance, and to reinforce dharma. The word age, as used by Krishna here, does not refer to historical ages like the Golden Age, Satyug, or the Iron Age, Kali Yuga. It rather alludes to the stages of rise and fall, of the waxing and waning of dharma, through which human nature has to pass. These are stages of dharma, and the human heart has to progress through them. Goswami Tulsidas has written about it in the Ramayana, chapter 7, verse 10. The stages of dharma undergo variation in every heart at all times, not because of ignorance, but because of the operation of the divine power of Maya. This is what has been named Atma Maya in the 6th verse of the chapter. Inspired by God, this knowledge is the one which makes the heart a veritable dwelling of God. But how can one know through which stage one is passing at the moment? When virtue and moral goodness, sattva, alone are active in the heart, when passion and ignorance have subsided, when all fears are stilled, when there is no feeling of repulsion, when there is the necessary strength to rest firmly on the signals that are received from the desired goal, when the mind is overflowing with happiness, then alone is one enabled to enter into the Golden Age. On the other hand, when the forces of darkness, tamas, combined with passion and moral blindness, rajas, are sweeping through, when there are animosities and conflicts all around, the worshipper is passing through the Iron Age, Kali Yuga. When there is predominance of ignorance and abundance of lethargy, slumber and procrastination, that is the stage of the Kali Yuga of Dharma. The man passing through this stage does not do his duty, even though he knows it. He knows what he is forbidden to do, and yet he does it. These stages of Dharma, of its ascent and descent, are determined by innate properties. These stages are the 4 ages, Yug, according to some, the 4 classes Varn, according to others, and the 4 levels of spiritual seeking, excellent, good, medium, and low, according to yet others. In all the stages, God stands by the worshipper. Nevertheless, there is a plenty of divine favor at the highest stage, whereas the assistance appears to be meager at the lower stages. So Krishna tells Arjuna that a worshipper who is earnestly devoted to his ultimate goal is a sage, but he can be saved only when the flow of divine impulses such as wisdom, renunciation, and self-restraint, which provide access to the object, is unimpeded. Similarly, doers of wicked deeds are not undone just by the destruction of their non-existent mortal bodies, because they will be reborn with the same wicked impressions, sanskar, that they had earned in the previous life, and do the same evil which they had done before. So Krishna manifests himself in all ages to destroy moral perversions and to strengthen dharma. Installation of the one changeless God alone is the final destruction of evil. In brief, Krishna has said that he manifests himself again and again in all circumstances and categories to destroy evil and foster good, and to strengthen faith in the Supreme Spirit. But he does this only if there is profound regret in the worshipper's heart. So long as the grace of the worshipped God is not with us, we cannot even know whether evil has been destroyed or how much of it still remains. From the beginning to the moment of final attainment, God stays by the worshipper at all stages. He manifests himself only in the devotee's heart. Does not everyone see him when he manifests himself? According to Krishna, this is not so.
Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vetti tatvatah tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna.
He who has perceived the essence of my radiant incarnations and works, O Arjun, is never born again after discarding his body, but dwells in me. God's incarnation, his gradual manifestation through profound remorse, and his works, eradication of hindrances which generate evil, provision of the essentials of self-realization, and reinstatement of dharma, are not like the birth and deeds of mortals. Perceived only as abstractions, God's incarnation and operations cannot be seen with physical eyes. He cannot be measured by mind and wisdom. God, so inscrutable and mysterious, is perceptible only to him who has known the reality. Only he can view God's incarnation and works, and once he has made this direct perception, he is not born again, but dwells in Krishna. When seers alone can see God's incarnation and works, why do we have these crowds of hundreds of thousands of men awaiting the birth of God so that they can see him? Are we all seers? There are many who masquerade as sages, mainly by dressing as holy men, and who claim that they are incarnations, and whose agents resort to publicity to prove it. The credulous rush like sheep to have a view of these so-called God-men, but Krishna affirms that only men of perfection can see God. Now, who is this man we call a seer? Giving his verdict on the real and the false in chapter 2, Krishna told Arjuna that the unreal has no being, and that the real has never been non-existent in all time, past, present, and future. This has been the experience of seers, rather than of linguists or wealthy men. Now he reiterates that although God manifests himself, only perceivers of essence can see him. He has been united with the ultimate reality and become a seer. We do not become seers by learning to count the 5 or 25 elements. Krishna further says that the soul alone is the ultimate reality. When the soul is united with this universal spirit, he too becomes God. So only a man who has realized the self can see and comprehend God's manifestation. It is evident, therefore, that God manifests himself in a worshipper's heart. At the outset, the worshipper is not able to recognize the power which transmits signals to him. Who is showing him the way? But after he has perceived the truth of the Supreme Spirit, he begins to see and understand, and thereafter, when he discards the body, he is not reborn. Krishna has said that his manifestation is internal, obscure, and luminous, and that the one who sees his radiance becomes one with him. But instead of this, people have made his idols, which they worship, and they imagine that he dwells somewhere in heaven. But this is far from the truth. Krishna only means by this that if men do the ordained task, they will find that they too are radiant. What others have the potential to be, Krishna already is. He represents the possibilities of mankind, their future. The day we achieve perfection within ourselves, we will also be what Krishna is. We will be identical with him. Incarnation is never external. If a heart is brimming with love and adoration, there is a possibility of its experiencing the divine incarnation. All the same, Krishna provides solace to the common people by telling them that many have realized him by treading on the ordained path.
वीतराग भय क्रोधा मन्मया मामुपाश्रिताः बहवो ज्ञानतपसा पूता मद्भावमागताः.
Free from passion and anger, wholly dedicated to me, finding shelter in me, and purified by knowledge and penance, many have realized my being. Many who have taken refuge in Krishna with single-mindedness and complete detachment, freed equally from passion and passionlessness, fear and fearlessness, anger and absence of anger, and purified by knowledge and penance, have attained to his state. It is not that only now it is so. This canon has always been in operation. Many have attained to his state before. But what is the way? Krishna shapes himself and appears in a heart that is filled with profound sorrow at the predominance of unrighteousness. It is people with such hearts who realize him. What Yogeshwar Krishna had previously called perception of reality, he now calls knowledge, or jnana. God is the ultimate reality. To perceive him is wisdom. Men with this knowledge therefore realize him. Here the problem is resolved, and Krishna now proceeds to distinguish worshippers according to their qualities.
यथा मां प्रपद्यन्ते तांस्तथैव भजाम्यहम् मम वर्त्मानुवर्तन्ते मनुष्याः पार्थ सर्वशः.
O Parth, as men worship me, even so do I accept them, and knowing this, the wise follow me in every way. Krishna rewards his worshippers according to the nature of their devotion. He assists them in the same degree. It is the worshipper's dedication that is returned to him as grace. Knowing this secret, the righteous conduct themselves with single-mindedness according to the way laid down by him. They who are dear to him act according to his way. They do what he ordains them to do. God shows his favor by standing with the worshipper as a charioteer. He begins to walk along with the worshipper and manifest his glory. This is the form of his loving care. He stands up for the destruction of forces that generate wickedness and to protect righteous impulses that provide access to reality. Unless the worshipped God acts as the earnest charioteer who alerts at every step, despite his dedication and closing his eyes in meditation and all other endeavors, the worshipper cannot cope with the adversities of the material world successfully. How is he to know how much distance he has covered and how much more remains to be covered? The adored God stands inseparably with the self and guides him. That he is now at this point, that he should do this and walk like that. Thus, the gulf of nature is gradually bridged, and, guiding the soul ahead by gradual steps, God at last enables him to merge into him. Worship and adoration have to be performed by the devotee, but the distance on the path which is covered by the devotee is only by God's grace. Knowing this, men who are pervaded by divine sentiment through and through follow Krishna's precept.
काङ्क्षन्तः कर्मणां सिद्धिं यजन्त इह देवताः क्षिप्रं हि मानुषे लोके सिद्धिर्भवति कर्मजा.
Desiring fruits of their action, men worship manifold gods, for the rewards of action are then earned quickly. Desiring accomplishment of the action within this human body, men take to the worship of many gods. Krishna has told Arjuna to perform the ordained action, which is performance of yajna, a way of worship, in which the incoming and outgoing life breaths are offered to God as oblation, and the outward-looking senses are burnt out in the fire of self-restraint, and whose final outcome is the attainment of God. The true meaning of action is worship, and this is again clarified later in this chapter. The outcome of this action is oneness with the eternal God, the supreme goal, the state of total actionlessness. Krishna says that men who follow his way worship gods for the attainment of actionlessness. That is, they strengthen divine impulses within. Krishna said in chapter 3 that Arjuna ought to practice yajna to foster gods, to strengthen his righteous impulses. He will progress more and more as these impulses are gradually strengthened and augmented. Thus advancing step by step, he will at last achieve the ultimate bliss. This is the final stage of the process of spiritual advancement that has to be gone through from the beginning to the end. Stressing the point, Krishna says that they who follow him, even though aspiring for accomplishment of action in their human bodies, tend the righteous impulses within, which quicken the advent of the state of actionlessness. Never failing, the process invariably succeeds. What, however, is the meaning of quickly or soon here? Is it that no sooner do we commence action than we are rewarded with the final achievement? According to Krishna, it is decreed that this height can be only gradually conquered, moving step by step. No one can leap across to the summit at once and bring about a miracle like the revelations that teachers of divinity nowadays claim for abstract meditation. Let us now see how it is.
चातुर्वर्ण्यं मया सृष्टं गुणकर्म विभागशः तस्य कर्तारमपि मां विद्य कर्तारमव्ययम्.
Although I have created the four classes, Varna, Brahman, Kshastri, Vaishya, and Shudra, according to innate properties and actions, know me, the immutable, as a non-doer. Krishna represents himself as the maker of the four classes. Does it mean that he has divided men into four rigid categories determined by birth? The truth is, rather, that he has divided actions into four classes on the basis of inherent properties. All the same, as he tells Arjuna, he, the imperishable God, is a non-agent and should be known as such. The innate property, gun, of a being or thing is a measure, a yardstick. If the dominant property is that of ignorance or darkness, tamas, it will result in an irresistible inclination to laziness, excessive sleep, wantonness, aversion to work, and compulsive addiction to evil, in spite of the realization that it is evil. How can worship commence in such a state? We sit and worship for 2 hours and we try to do it with the utmost earnestness, and yet we fail to secure even 10 minutes that are truly propitious. The body is still and quiet, but the mind, which should be really quiet, soars aloft, weaving webs of fancies. Waves upon waves of speculation toss it. Then why do we sit idly in the name of meditation and waste time? The only remedy at this stage is to dedicate ourselves to the service of wise men who dwell in the unmanifest and of those who have gone ahead of us on the path. This will subdue negative impressions and strengthen thoughts that are conducive to worship. Gradually, With the diminishing of forces of darkness and ignorance, there is the growing sway of the quality of rajas, and a partial awakening of the property of good and moral virtue, sattva, as well, because of which the worshipper's ability is elevated to the Vashya level. Then the same worshipper begins spontaneously to imbibe qualities such as control of the senses and to accumulate other virtuous impulses. Proceeding further on the path of action, he is endowed with the wealth of righteousness. The property of rajas now grows faint, and tamas is dormant. At this stage of development, the worshipper steps on to the shastriya level. Prowess, the ability to be immersed in action, unwillingness to retreat, mastery over feelings, the capacity to carve his way through the three properties of nature, all are now the inherent features of the worshipper's disposition. With yet further refinement of action, sattva makes its approach, at which there is the evolution of virtues such as control of the mind and senses, concentration, innocence, contemplation, and abstract meditation, and faith, as well as the capacity to hear the voice of God, all qualities that provide access to Him. With the emergence of these qualities, the worshipper comes to belong to the Brahmin class. This, however, is the lowest stage of worship at this level. When ultimately the worshipper is united with God, at that point, the highest point, he is neither a Brahmin, nor a Shastriya, nor a Vashya, nor a Shudra. So worship of God is the only action, the ordained action, and it is this one action that is divided into 4 stages according to the motivating properties. The division was made, as we have seen, by a saint, by a Yogeshwar. A sage dwelling in the unmanifest was the maker of this division. Yet Krishna tells Arjuna to regard him, the indestructible and maker of Varn, as a non-doer. How can it be so?
Namam karmani limpanti, name karma phale spriha, iti mam yobhijanati, karma bhirna sabadhyate.
I am unsullied by action because I am not attached to it, and they who are aware of this are in the like fashion unfettered by action. Krishna is unattached to the fruits of action. He said before that the deed by which yajna is accomplished is action, and that the one who tastes the nectar of wisdom generated by yajna merges into the changeless, eternal God. So the final consequence of action is attainment of the Supreme Spirit Himself. And Krishna has overcome even the desire for God, because He has become identical with Him. So He is also unmanifest like God. There is now no power beyond for which He should strive. So He is untouched by action, and they who know Him from the same level, from the level of God realization, are also not bound by action. Such are the realized sages who have reached the level of Krishna's accomplishment.
Evam gyatva kritam karma purvairapi mumukshubhihi kuru karmaiva tasmat tvam purvaihi purvataram kritam.
Since it is with this wisdom that men aiming at salvation from worldly existence have also performed action in earlier times, you too should follow the example of your predecessors. In the past, too, men desiring salvation had acted with the same realization. that the patterns of action are severed when, as the final outcome of his action, the doer is one with God, and when he is liberated from desire even for him. Krishna belongs to this state, so he is untainted by action, and if we have what he has, we too will be freed from the bonds of action. Whoever knows what Krishna knows from his elevated position will be freed from action. So whatever Krishna might have been, the unmanifest God or accomplished sage, his attainment is within the reach of all of us. It was with this kind of wisdom that earlier men aspiring for salvation had set upon the path of action. It is for this reason that Arjuna is told to do what his predecessors have done. This is the only way that leads to the sublime good. So far, Krishna has stressed the performance of action, but he has not yet explained what this action is. He only mentioned it in chapter 2 and told Arjuna to listen to him on selfless action. He described its special features, one of which is that it gives protection against the terrible fear of birth and death. He then dwelt upon the precautions that have to be observed in its performance. But despite all this, he has not pointed out what action is. He later added in chapter 3 that whether one prefers the way of knowledge or the way of selfless action, action is a necessity in each case. One becomes neither wise by renouncing action, nor emancipated from action by just not undertaking it. They who suppress their organs of action with violence are just arrogant hypocrites. So Arjuna should act, restraining his senses with the mind. Krishna told him to do the ordained action, which is performance of yajna, to clarify the meaning of action. And now, in this chapter, he has told Arjuna that even scholars of great erudition are confounded by the problems of what action is and what actionlessness is. So it is important that action and actionlessness are understood well.
Kim karma kima karmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshami yajgyatva mokshase shubha.
Even wise men are confused about the nature of action and actionlessness, and so I shall explain the meaning of action to you well, so that knowing it you may be emancipated from evil. What are action and the state in which there is no action? Even men of learning are confounded by these questions. So Krishna tells Arjuna that he is going to expound well the meaning of action to him, so that he can be freed from worldly bondage. He has already said that action is something that liberates from the fetters of temporal life. Now again, he stresses the importance of knowing what it is.
Karmano hyapi bodhavyam bodhavyam cha vikarmanah akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gatihi.
It is essential to know the nature of action as well as of actionlessness, and also that of meritorious action, for the ways of action are so inscrutable. It is of the utmost importance to know what action is and what actionlessness is, as also the action which is free from all doubt and ignorance, and which is undertaken by men of wisdom who have renounced all worldly desire and attachment. This is imperative because the problem of action is a great riddle. Some commentators have interpreted the word vikarm in the text, which has been translated here as meritorious action, as instead forbidden or prohibited action, or diligent action, and so on. But the preposition vi, prefixed to the root karm, here denotes merit or excellence. The action of men who have attained to the ultimate bliss is free from all uncertainty and error. For sages who dwell and find contentment in the self, and love Him and the Supreme Spirit, there is neither any profit in accomplishing action, nor any loss in forsaking it, but yet they act for the good of those who are behind them. Such action is pure, and it is free from all doubt and ignorance. We have just seen meritorious action, so we are now left with action and actionlessness. They are explained in the next verse, and if we do not understand the distinction between the two here, we will perhaps never understand it.
कर्मण्यकर्मयः पश्येद् अकर्मणि च कर्म यः स बुद्धिमान् मनुष्येषु स युक्तः कृत्स्नकर्मकृत्.
One who can perceive non-action in action and action in non-action is a wise man and an accomplished doer of perfect action. Action means worship, and the accomplished doer is one who sees non-action in action, that is, who contemplates God and yet believes simultaneously that rather than being the doer, he has only been prompted to action by his inherent properties. Only when this ability to see non-action has been mastered and the continuity of action is unbroken, should one believe that action is proceeding in the right direction. The man with this insight is a wise man, verily a yogi, endowed with the means by which the individual soul is united with the Supreme Spirit, and a doer of perfect action. There is not even the slightest error in his performance of action. But before we come to the next verse, let us recall briefly, for the sake of better understanding, what Krishna has said about action and yajna so far. What is usually done in the name of action, he has said, is not action. Action is a prescribed undertaking, the performance of yajna. Whatever else is done besides this is not action. According to Krishna, anything apart from this that is done is worldly bondage rather than action. From what Krishna has spoken about the nature of yajna, it is evident that it is a particular mode of worship which guides the devotee to the adored God and effects his dissolution in him. For the performance of this yajna, one has to subdue the senses, control the mind, and augment pious impulses. Concluding this part of the argument, Krishna said that many yogis depend upon serenity of breath during silent recitation of the deity's name by restraining the life winds, in which state there is neither internal volition nor coming into the mind of any desire from the external environment. In such a state of total restraint of the mind, when even the restrained mind itself is dissolved, the worshipper merges into the changeless, eternal God. This is yajna, the performance of which is action. Therefore, the true meaning of action is worship. It means divine adoration and practice of yoga. And this is what is treated at length later in the chapter under review. So far, only a distinction has been made between action and non-action, the awareness of which will guide the worshipper onto the right path and enable him to tread effectively on it.
यस्य सर्वे समारम्भाः कामसङ्कल्पवर्जिताः ज्ञानाग्निदग्धकर्माणं तमाहुः पंडितं बुधाः.
Even the learned call that man a sage, all of whose actions are free from desire and will, both burnt to ashes by the fire of knowledge. It was said in the last verse that with the acquisition of the capacity of perceiving non-action in action, the man who is engaged in action grows into a doer of perfect action in which there is not even the slightest flaw. Now it is added that restraint of desire and will is a victory of the mind. So action is something that elevates the mind above desire and will. Krishna tells Arjuna that a well-commenced action gradually becomes so refined and sublimated that it takes the mind above will as well as above irresolution. And then, with the burning out of even the last desire which he does not know, but which he was previously eager to know, the worshipper is blessed with direct perception of God. Direct knowledge of God by following the path of action is called knowledge, or jnana, the sacred knowledge that enables the soul to be united with the Supreme Spirit. The fire of this direct perception of God annihilates action forever. What was sought has been achieved. There is nothing beyond it to quest for. Who is there beyond God to search for with further endeavor? So with the attainment of this wisdom, the need for action comes to an end. Rightly have sages called men with such wisdom pandit, men of profound erudition. Their learning is perfect. But what does such a saint do? How does he live? Krishna now illumines his way of life.
त्यक्त्वा कर्मफलासङ्गं नित्यतृप्तो निराश्रयः कर्मण्यभिप्रवृत्तोऽपि नैव किञ्चित् करोति सः.
Independent of the world, ever contented, and renouncing all attachment to action as well as its fruits, such a man is free from action even while he is engaged in it. Declining to rest upon objects of the world, utterly contented with dwelling in the eternal God, and discarding not only desire for the fruits of action, but even attachment to God, because now he is not removed from him. This sage is a non-doer, even while he is diligently employed in the performance of action.
निराशीर्यत चित्तात्मा त्यक्त सर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्.
He who has conquered his mind and senses and given up all objects of sensual pleasure does not partake of sin, even when his body seems to be engaged in action. It is only the physical body of the man who has overcome both his mind and senses, renounced all objects of worldly enjoyment, and achieved total freedom from desire, that seems to be engaged in action, whereas in truth he does nothing, and that is why he does not incur sin. He is perfect, and so he is emancipated from the cycle of birth and death.
यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टो द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समः सिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वापि न निबध्यते.
Contented with what comes to him unsought, he who is indifferent to happiness and sorrow, free from envy, and even-minded in success and failure, is a man of equanimity, unenslaved by action, even when he performs it. When a man is contented with whatever comes to him, without being desired or asked for, indifferent to happiness and sorrow, and love and animosity, free from any negative feeling, and abiding with equanimity in attainment and unattainment. He is not fettered by action, even though he appears to be engaged in it. Since the goal he had aimed at is now achieved, and it will not ever desert him, he is freed from the terror of defeat. Looking alike at achievement and non-achievement, this man acts, but without infatuation. And what he does is nothing other than yajna, the act of supreme sacrifice. Reiterating the concept, Krishna adds,
Gata sangasya muktasya jnanavasthita chetasah yajnaya charata